Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Got so quiet there. It's amazing. Minister, past presidents, board members of the Empire Club of Canada and the Canadian Club of Toronto, elected officials from our federal, provincial, and municipal governments, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very endearing tradition that occurs at this approximate time each year, that being a post-budget analysis and presentation by the Federal Minister of Finance, an office that is presently occupied by our very special guest speaker today. My name is Gordon McIver. I'm the immediate past president of the Empire Club of Canada and your co-host for today's lunch. You will meet the other co-host, the other half of this duo, the infinitely more charming Jennifer Sloan, who will join us a little bit later in this program. So I'd now like to call this meeting to order, and would you please remain standing while I respect a club tradition and we say grace. United by common interests and concerns, we have gathered here. We each in our own way express our gratitude. We are thankful for this time together, for the meal that we shall eat, for the people who have prepared it, and for the freedom of expression and information that we all share. We are thankful for both this heritage and for today's gathering. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I ask that you join me in singing our national anthem. One of the great, you were applauding for your own singing, right? I'm assuming. One of the great traditions of both clubs is that we start each meeting with a toast. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd ask that you raise your glass and join me in a toast to Canada and to the Queen. And please bear with me and remain standing as we conduct one final piece of business, and that is a draw for today's door prize. I'd like to now invite our special guest speaker today to draw a business card. And while he's doing that, I will tell you that the lucky winner will receive a bottle of 2014 Conspiracy Vintage Wine from the Foreign Affair Winery in Vineland, Ontario. And Minister, the winner is?
It's George Misek from CMLS Financial.
There we go. George, congratulations. Congratulations. Okay, please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. And a sincere thanks to our generous sponsors today, the Bank of Montreal, BDO, CIBC, Scotiabank, RBC, and the TD Bank for making this event possible. Without sponsors like these great companies, club lunches would not be possible, so thank you once again for your support. I also want to thank the National Post as our print media sponsor of the Empire Club of Canada. Okay, let us acknowledge as well the youth and young leaders who are with us today from the University of Toronto Political Science, who are with us today thanks to the support of Simon Dwyer from BCE. So youth and young leaders from the University of Toronto, would you please stand up and be recognized? There we go. Welcome, students. Now, before our distinguished speaker is introduced today, and by the way, he is going to speak before lunch, as I think you all know, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our head table guests. Please refrain from applause until all of our guests have been introduced, and we'd ask that each guest stand and be briefly acknowledged and then sit down. So starting with our honourable guest, very special guest of honour, Bill Morneau, the Canadian Minister of Finance. My co-host today, Ms. Jennifer Sloan, the Vice President, Senior Business Leader, Public Policy, Canada with MasterCard, and a past President of the Canadian Club of Toronto. Mr. James O'Sullivan, the Group Head for Canadian Banking, Scotiabank. Mr. Doug Porter, the Chief Economist, BMO Financial Group. Ms. Helen Reeves, the Senior Vice President, Corporate Communications and Marketing, Morneau Chappelle, and a Director of the Canadian Club of Toronto. Mr. Colin Lynch, Senior Vice President, Strategy and Growth at Greystone Managed Investments, Inc., and the First Vice President of the Empire Club of Canada. Mr. Doug Guzman, Group Head, Wealth Management and Insurance, RBC. Mr. Dean Elliott, Managing Partner, Central Group and Market Strategic Leader, BDO Canada. The oft-quoted Avery Schenfeld, Managing Director and Chief Economist, CIBC. Ms. Martine Ehrman, Vice Chair, TD Securities. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is your head table. We are delighted to welcome you all today to this joint meeting of our two clubs, known across this country for the fundamental roles that each one has played for well over a century now. It's been said that no issue of substance remains unexamined by the Empire Club of Canada and the Canadian Club of Toronto. And if you've lived in this fair city for any length of time, you will be well in agreement with this statement through the many thousands of topics that our clubs have brought to Canadians in order to give them more background and context so that they can make better and more informed decisions. I don't know exactly when the Canadian and Empire Clubs began teaming up to do this annual presentation, and it has not occurred every year, but the two clubs have certainly come together many dozens of times over the decades to present this annual event to Canadians. Having had the honour of presiding both organizations at different times in my career, it's indeed a pleasure for me to open this meeting today and welcome the Honourable Bill Morneau to our joint meeting. Une partie fondamentale de nos deux organisations est de présenter les grands leitmotifs de l'époque. Et le budget fédéral a toujours été, depuis le début de nos deux organisations respectives, d'une importance magistrale pour nos membres et aussi, bien entendu, pour tous les citoyens de notre démocratie. L'année dernière, nous avons reçu l'honorable ministre des Finances au tout début de son mandat. Et il nous a présenté à ce moment-là une nouvelle direction que son gouvernement a entreprise à partir des élections d'octobre 2015. Aujourd'hui, il nous parlera du progrès, mais aussi des défis à surmonter, une présentation que nous attendons tous, bien sûr, avec une grande impatience. One thing is certain, our financial planning and the course we set as a country is in all likelihood the most important topic that we present to our members and audiences each year at this time. Policies and planning radically change with each government, as we're seeing in real time play out with our neighbours to the south. And everyone in this room today would agree that these policies and procedures have a profound impact on all of our various business activities and on what we prioritize in establishing the highest quality of life that we can achieve for all of our citizens. That is why we're all here today and why it's such a pleasure to welcome back to this joint meeting of the Canadian and Empire Clubs one of the most important players in the Trudeau government, the Honourable Bill Morneau. He will take this opportunity today to outline the next step in the federal government's economic plan to support Canada's middle class and those working so hard to join it. Minister Morneau will also discuss at today's meeting how Budget 2017 works to give Canadians the tools that they need for the economy of tomorrow. Now, the Minister has agreed to take some questions following this speech. You will find on the table some cards, so if you do have a question, please write it on the card, hold it up during the speech, and our roving volunteers will come by and collect your question for the Minister. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please join me and my colleagues in welcoming Canada's 39th Finance Minister, the Honourable Member for Toronto Centre, Finance Minister and Economic Planner par excellence, Minister Bill Morneau.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. I'll start by thanking Gordon and saying that in his introduction, he said that this was going to be a discussion about the budget and an analysis of the budget. I can tell you it might not be an analysis of the budget because I'll leave that to other people. I did have the opportunity, though, to ask Avery Shenfield at my table and Doug Porter at my table, two of our esteemed chief bank economists, their points of view. Now, of course, I asked them directly, so not sure I got exactly their point of view, but they both said it was okay. So I'm going to take what I can get at this stage. It's important to recognize there's all shades of gray when you introduce a budget, and as long as those two are kind of in the middle, that sounds pretty good to me. So I want to start by thanking all of you for being here today. It's obviously been, for me, a pretty charged last couple days. For that matter, a pretty charged last year and a half. And I can tell you that one of the best parts of my job is when I get to come back home, because my family is still here, and see friends, people who I've worked with over the years, see people who I'm working with now. I see Stephen Del Duca off to the over here, and I'm sure there are other elected representatives here. I see people like Frank McKenna, who is sitting with him, who has done so much for our country. So I know that there's so many of you here today that represent the Toronto business community and are important in helping our economy to be successful. So I want to say it's a real pleasure to be here. And I see Barry Campbell back there, too. I just now. So it's really great to be here. You may have heard that our budget was entitled Building a Strong Middle Class. You may have heard us use the words working hard for the middle class and those working hard to join it. That is indeed critically important for us. Notre budget cette année, c'était vraiment pour nous une continuation de notre plan pour faire croître notre économie, mais même pour améliorer la situation de la classe moyenne au Canada. Nous savons que c'est très important d'avoir un niveau d'optimisme pour avoir un niveau de croissance. Nous avons commencé avec les mesures pour améliorer la situation de la classe moyenne. Et aujourd'hui, cette semaine, notre plan, c'est vraiment le deuxième chapitre. Comment nous pouvons avoir une vision pour le long terme pour notre pays. Really, as I said, our plan is about dealing with challenges in our country today and tomorrow. It's a plan that's about creating good middle-class jobs today, while really about preparing Canadians for the jobs of tomorrow. It's a plan that brings hope and optimism back to the middle class by investing in our people, by investing in our communities, and by investing in our economy. And it's not lost on me when I come back here that for many people in this room, our plan has asked more from you. Last year, we asked many of you to pay more in tax so that we could cut taxes for the middle class, for 9 million Canadians. We decided that the Canada Child Benefit would become means-tested so that for many of you, frankly, like for me, you no longer receive a monthly check from the federal government if you have children under the age of 18. We asked more for you so that 9 out of 10 families across this country would receive, on average, $2,300 more per year, tax-free for their family. We asked more from you so that we could do more for the middle class and for those people who are working hard to do better for themselves and their families. We know from what we've seen across the country that it's having an impact. It's having an impact on increased discretionary spending for people across the country. But I know from my new role in different ways that it's having an impact. One of the stories I told in my budget a couple days ago was about an evening when I was having dinner in Toronto a few months ago. I got out of the restaurant in Cabbagetown, I got into a taxi cab, and the driver looked in his rearview mirror and he recognized who I was. That's a new feature of my life. And he broke into a huge smile and he said, "I've got to call my wife." And he proceeded during the course of our taxi drive to have his wife go and check their financial records. He has an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 10-month-old. And they told me what it meant for their family. So this is a taxi driver. And for them, it meant $300 extra per month each month. So $3,600 a year, tax-free. So I think all of us can imagine how hard it is to be a taxi driver. Most of us been in taxis in the city. I think we know that an overwhelming majority of the people that are driving taxis are highly qualified people who are working hard to do well for their family for the next generation. So for him, it's really a lifeline. It's a lifeline for him to be able to buy school supplies for his family, to create the opportunity for his family that's going to be so important for them down the road, for his children as they look towards what they're going to do. And it's a plan, frankly, that I can tell you that's even more important now than it was 18 months ago when we started. I'll tell you, back when I attended my very first G20 meeting in November of 2015 in Antalya, Turkey, people looked at our plan to invest in the middle class in Canada with interest. People were seeing that this was important, but frankly with a level of curiosity about what we were trying to achieve. And not everyone in that room, and this was the leaders and the finance ministers from the 20 largest countries, not everyone saw what our Prime Minister saw or what I saw. Or maybe at that stage they didn't take it quite as seriously. And that was that the middle class was feeling anxious about their future and the future for their children and the future for their grandchildren. Well, I can tell you that a lot has changed in our world just in that last 18 months. It's become more and more obvious to all of us, certainly to the people in that room, but to all of us, I expect, in this room, that middle-class anxiety is not only real, but it's become a powerful force in our world. I just got back from my latest G20 meeting in Baden-Baden in Germany. I was there this past weekend. And I'll tell you that where we were there talking about what to do, we were talking about sharing the benefits of growth and globalization and trade. Yes, they were on everyone's mind. Those are continuing subjects at G20 meetings. But just as important at the meeting this year was talking about the benefits of inclusive growth, the benefits of making sure that people aren't left behind in our societies, that they're actually engaged in our collective efforts to do better for the long term. So I will tell you, and it's the subject of great interest in every room I go into right now, that I met with the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Steven Mnuchin, both in Washington, and again, we spent a lot of time together in Germany over the weekend. We talked really mostly about our shared interest in making sure that we deal with that anxiety, and that in both of our countries, that we find a way to do better for people who are not seeing the hope that they thought they would see in a generation before or the generation before that. So people are coming around to see what people in the middle class have been seeing now for some time, that the advances of technology, yes, they've been pushing our society ahead, but more and more people are falling behind with the challenges that they're facing with those changes. And I know that we can debate the statistics, and with people like Doug and Avery and others, we will debate the statistics and the Gini coefficients and what's actually going on with middle-class families and people who are looking to do well. But I will say that you can look around the world and say that the evidence is pretty clear. We in the Department of Finance, we reached out and touched 1 million Canadians in our pre-budget consultations. And as you know, not that long ago, I had the opportunity to knock on literally tens of thousands of households' doors in downtown Toronto, in this city. And, you know, we're seeing the movements around the world that are undeniably fueled by a deep sense of uncertainty about our collective future. So that's why we're here. We are of the view that we just cannot ignore middle-class anxiety in our country. We need to know that the success of our country, and I think we all agree our great country, really requires all hands on deck. We all need to work together to get to where we want to be. So our government, really on behalf of the people, of course, who elected us, we chose to act. And I will say that as I go to those international meetings, more and more people around the world are looking at Canada as a model of how to respond in a positive and an optimistic and a generous way dealing with these very real challenges. And what we're seeing now, and what's so important as we are out communicating that, is that our plan is beginning to work. There is, I will tell you, from what we see, from the statistics we see, a growing sense of optimism among Canada's middle class across the country. Over the past 7 months, our economy has created 250,000 new jobs. And we all see the statistics all the time and try and parse them and figure out what they mean. But over that 7-month period, that's the largest number of new jobs that we've seen in a decade. And I know that we see in the newspapers very often that there's a challenge that many jobs are part-time, and it's true. But in that 7-month period, I will tell you that the majority of those jobs were full-time jobs. So since 2015, since we've come into office, our unemployment rate has gone down from 7.1% to 6.6%. We also know, as I mentioned earlier, that consumer spending has increased, and we know that it's at least in part a result of the increase in the Canada Child Benefit. We think that the pace of economic activity is likely to increase in 2017. So this week, with Budget 2017, we're taking the next step in our plan to make a real difference for you and for all those people in our country who aren't in this room. We're building on our past commitments, our past investments, to make sure that our communities are a better place to live. We've committed to making historic investments in infrastructure, $180 billion over the next decade. We want to make sure that in 10 years, our economy won't just be more dynamic, but that public transit will get us home faster at the end of each day. It'll mean more time with our kids, yes, but it'll also mean higher productivity, and it'll help us to be globally competitive as we try and attract companies and people to come to our country to experience our success. As a trading nation, being competitive on a global scale, we know, requires world-class infrastructure. So in our budget, we introduced a national trade corridors investment to deal with traffic congestion, to make sure that the busiest rail and highway corridors around the Greater Toronto Area and other places in our country, that we have more money directed to what is one of our biggest challenges as a country. We'll also use our new Canada Infrastructure Bank, which we talked more about in our budget, to leverage the expertise and the capital of the private sector to help cities and towns across our country to get big and transformative projects for infrastructure off the ground. So with this idea, with the Canada Infrastructure Bank, our goal is to lever the institutional money, the pension fund money around the world that wants to invest in infrastructure to help us by building big transformative infrastructure projects like transit or electricity grids. We'll build more and we'll make all of our lives better by combining government and private capital together to improve our communities. That's our goal. We know that many projects, if we don't find a way to leverage outside capital, they wouldn't get built. So we know that it's appropriate for us to think about creative ways to work together with the private sector to make a difference. I want to stop on that for a second. What you'll see as a continuing objective of this government is to try to work together with the private sector to get things done in our country. We know that government can't do it all. We know that we're going to need all of us working together. We know, importantly, that we're going to need your help, people in the business community, to make the impact that we want to make on our country. So we saw one thing that we've done very recently, the Canadian Business Growth Fund. We saw a great example of how we can work together, how the private sector and the public sector can make a difference. With the help of my advisory council on growth, we identified a gap for small and medium-sized enterprises that wanted to make sure they had access to capital to grow, to stay here in Canada, and really access the necessary funding without giving up the control of their enterprises at a time when they might not want to do that. So we convened our financial institutions in this country, and they are very amenable to that discussion, and they got together and saw an opportunity not only to help their businesses, but to help other businesses, to create an ecosystem that was going to be stronger in our country. And I'll tell you that it happened at a very rapid speed. I can say from my business experience, maybe not quite as fast in the public sector as in the private sector, so we might have been a slow part of it, but the private sector moved very rapidly. And it's a good reminder that all of the solutions that we seek to have don't necessarily have to come with a cost to taxpayers. So as a government, we're going to continue to look for solutions both inside and outside government to push Canada and to push our economy forward. With our investments in infrastructure, with our approach to how we're going to try to grow the economy, we believe that we can make a real difference to position our country to be more innovative over the long term. Our plan strives for nothing less than to make Canada a world-leading place for innovation, in part by making big bets on sectors where we know that Canada is already successful and can be more successful. Places like digital, clean technology, agriculture, places where you in this room know that we're already successful and we can do more. From urban centers to rural farms, from researchers looking to secure new patents, to entrepreneurs working to bring their products to market, we know that we need to be innovative to make sure that we can adapt to change and prepare for a dynamic and changing future. So, as we think about this, as complex and as challenging as it may be to be more innovative, we need to think about what lies behind every innovative economy, every innovative company, and that's skilled, talented, and creative people. We want every Canadian to see the opportunities in a newly and more innovative economy. It's why we're working not just on creating jobs today, but on making sure that we get people ready for the jobs that we need to have tomorrow. Because as we have this immense challenge with a dynamic economy, we know that we need to prepare people for the next better job. So that's why we call what we're doing our Innovation and Skills Plan. With it, we're going to support a culture of lifelong learning to help workers and their families to adapt to the changing demands of our time. We're going to help students to get the work experience that they need to kickstart their careers. We'll make it more affordable to pursue higher education so everyone has access. And we're going to expand access to training to help Canadians to learn new skills. And we're going to help people who've lost their jobs to pursue training so that they can get back into the workforce. So since we've started, our plan has been to put people first. And I can tell you that it's been good for business. In the last 7 months, as I said, we've seen the highest job growth in over a decade. Where other countries might have put on the brakes, we did what confident and ambitious countries do. We invested in ourselves. And we did it while always keeping an eye on our fiscal situation and our capacity to make investments. Investing with purpose is something that we take very seriously. So while others around the world are choosing to potentially close themselves off, we are choosing to be open. We're choosing to make investments. We're fortunate, we think, that Canada has exactly the right ingredients to do exactly that. We have the best fiscal situation among G7 countries. We have a diverse and highly educated population. Our population clearly is ready to focus on having accelerated growth. Our financial system is among the world's soundest, and we're host to world-class pension funds in our country. We have the lowest total business tax costs and the lowest overall business costs in the G7. We're one of the only 10 countries in the world with AAA ratings from all 3 major credit rating agencies. So our goal is to build up on that. And that's not just for industries, but that's for all of us. It's really one of the things that we're working to do as we think about trade. We've strengthened our relationships with our top 5 trading partners. With the United States, we're working hard. With Mexico, with China, with Japan, and with the European Union. And we're making inroads, we know, all across Asia. In fact, I'm very pleased to announce that today, well, officially yesterday, Canada became the first North American country to be accepted into the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which will help boost economic growth around the world with high-quality infrastructure projects. And we know it will help Canada as well as part of the global economy. Our membership means that we'll be able to help fund high-quality infrastructure projects in Asia and contribute to global growth. So trade, openness, and investment, we hope to give all Canadians a real and fair chance at success. That's what our plan's about. We want to help families feel better about their future and the future of their children and their grandchildren, and make sure that the next generation gets what this generation, what the generation before, have always had in Canada: optimism fueled by opportunity. So thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to working together with people in this room, and I'm looking forward to also to answering your questions. I have one more thing to say. I do have one more thing to say. Jennifer is going to say some words here, but it's her birthday today. So happy birthday, Jennifer.
Oh, thank you.
Am I staying up here?
Thank you very much, Minister. It's my birthday, hence the glasses, getting old here. Minister, the audience has posed some great questions, so I'll just take you through them if I may. The first one, for this year's budget, you dedicate a chapter to addressing how measures impact men, women, and intersectional groups in different ways. And you said it's a first step. So why was this so important to you, and what's the next step?
So who asked that? Do we plant that question?
No. No attribution. No attribution.
This is something really important to us, and I think it's really important to all of us. We know that among the really significant challenges we have in our country is that we need to deal with demographic change. We need to deal with looking towards a future and making sure that all segments of our population are engaged and making a real difference. We also know that women are central to our economy. So we looked at workforce participation, and of course we all know that equal pay for equal work is not a reality yet in this country, and it needs to be. So we said to ourselves that budgets impact different people in different ways. And so one thing we need to do is look at what we're doing in our budget and evaluate how each measure impacts men and women. In particular, are the measures that we're taking in the budget actually going to advance our cause of having greater workforce participation among women, having opportunities that are better for women, and having real opportunities to ensure equality in the country? This is a first start. It's the first time it's ever been done in Canada. We worked hard to do it. We're going to get better at this because obviously you need to build expertise to actually consider how to do this. But I will tell you that what you've seen us do is not only symbolically important, but long-term important for our country. We've taken some measures this year, but we will continue to focus on this issue. You saw our early learning and child care investment. We've committed a significant investment to increasing child care spaces across this country. We know that it's particularly challenging for women to be engaged in the workforce without adequate child care, so that's an important mechanism. We also took a look, for example, at our venture capital situation. There's been a real success story over the last number of years with venture capital that's gone through the Business Development Bank of Canada. But what we found was that it's not actually as successful for women as men. They're not actually accessing the venture capital as easily. So we put in a special part of the fund for women entrepreneurs so that we can, for all of us in the room who have daughters or the friends of our daughters, so they can see that the opportunity for them in the future is going to be significantly greater. And, that's clearly what we're trying to achieve. You will see this as an ongoing effort from our government to make sure that we're making a difference in this area.
Thank you. Minister, our next question is, what can Toronto expect to see from the government's $11 billion investment in housing in Budget 2017?
We put a very significant part of our infrastructure spending into housing. We understand that affordable housing across our country is a critically important issue for so many families that are struggling to get by. The housing stock that we have, the affordable housing stock that we have, needs renovation. We need more spaces, more opportunities for people to find housing. So what we've done is put that funding in place that will be really apportioned across the country. Our next step is to come to work with cities and provinces to figure out exactly how we can have the biggest impact. That really starts yesterday, post-budget. What you can imagine is that as you think about the demographics of Toronto versus other parts in the country, you can think about the quantum of that fund that's Toronto-based. But of course, we want to seek other ways to amplify that, both working with the provinces and the municipalities will allow us to amplify that funding. And we're even open to thinking about whether there are ways that we can even use private capital to think about expanding even more in the housing area. But each thing one step at a time. We think we're going to have an enormous impact by being part of this equation and make an important long-term difference for people who are trying to be successful with their family and engaged in the workforce.
Minister, the questions are getting more complicated here. This is going to be a tough one for you in front of this audience. Bill, what is your favorite NHL hockey team? And do you take selfies?
You know, I actually haven't, surprisingly, had so much time to go to hockey games in the last year and a half. My favorite team is the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm happy to say that. And I'm actually fairly pathetic at selfies. So.
We actually have a question from the CEO of Waterfront Toronto. The budget highlights innovation, growing jobs through new technology, and bringing together private industry and funders. The proposed infrastructure bank is identified as a key tool to realize those priorities. Can you amplify how the bank might help accelerate job growth and prosperity?
I'm delighted to talk about this. I know at least a number of people in this room who've been part of our discussion about how we can increase the amount of funding that we put towards infrastructure. We identified early on as a government, we said, we've got a situation where around the world there are pension funds, institutional investors, who in the face of low interest rates are seeking to have a significant amount of their assets put into infrastructure opportunities. The reason they want that is because it's a long-term opportunity for them to match the assets they have with the liabilities they have, so that's important for them. They also said that with looking around the world, it's very difficult to find enough infrastructure assets, especially in places with relatively low political risk. So you think about Canada, we obviously are a place with quite low political risk. We haven't created the opportunities for our big pension funds to invest in Canada as much as we'd like to because we haven't created big enough opportunities for them. So we said, let's create an organization that will be the place where we house infrastructure investment expertise in this country. We already know we're best in class in this from one angle because our pension funds are best in class in the world at investing outward in infrastructure. So we have this expertise already here. So let's find a way to make sure that we build that expertise. Let's build the pipeline of projects for investors to look at from around the world. This is particularly important and continuing to be the case in a low interest rate environment. And that's really what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to find the projects, develop the expertise so we can actually contract with the funds that might come in to enhance the amount of infrastructure. So what does this do? The question is really, is it going to have impact on the short term? Is it going to have impact on the long term? And the answer to both those questions is yes. It means we're going to get more projects up and going sooner. Our intent is to get the infrastructure bank up and running this year. Our intent is to have projects that we can look at and consider, projects that are going to provide opportunities for investors, but importantly, increase our productivity. And hopefully we'll have those products this year. That means there'll be things starting soon. And then over the long term, of course, the impact is even greater because if we have better roads, better electricity grids, things that are actually going to enhance our productivity, we're going to create a better infrastructure for our long-term capacity together.
Minister, you've been very generous with your time. And
everybody else is waiting to eat.
Yes, exactly. So very last question. It comes from the president of OCAD University. How will the budget foster collaboration between business and universities to strengthen Canada's innovation capacity?
Well, We've made a very significant commitment to focus on sectors in our budget. We've said that we need to, we've looked at places in the world that have been most successful, and they've been places where universities and research institutes, significant firms, and an ecosystem of firms around them are able to work together and collaborate to create heightened economic activity. In Canada, we have examples of where we've been successful. Obviously, in the natural resource sector, in Kitchener-Waterloo, we've been very successful. So there are multiple examples. We want to take, if you think about Kitchener-Waterloo and the success between University of Waterloo and the Perimeter Institute and firms there like OpenText and RIM that have been successful, and all the firms around there that have done well. And we want to try and do that on purpose by focusing on sectors. I mentioned 3 in my prepared remarks, but sectors like the digital sector, like agriculture, natural resource, clean technology, health and bioscience, and advanced manufacturing, places we've identified where we think we're already leading, and we can do even better by focusing our efforts and trying to create that ecosystem. So it will be important for places like OCAD that have such enormously creative people there to be part of this equation in many ways. And I can think, obviously, in places like the innovative digital economy, how a place like OCAD can have an enormous impact and be part of what we hope will be a dynamic ecosystem of success. So I think that's the last question. I want to thank you very much for all being out and apologize for stopping you from eating. But I look forward to meeting with many of you when we conclude the lunch. Thank you.
I'm just going to wrap up here very, very quickly. Minister Morneau, on behalf of the Canadian and Empire Clubs, I'd like to thank you for sharing with us today the details of Budget 2017. Merci. We appreciate you choosing our podium, or podiums, to outline how your budget will create jobs, spur innovation, and ensure a stronger future for all of us. While there is angst and uncertainty in international markets, you are right that we must stay the course and defend our national interests. Budget 2017 is as hopeful as it is ambitious. We wish you abundant success as you put your financial plans to action. We'd also like to thank today the Fairmont Royal York and its staff, MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for live streaming today's event. To learn more about the Canadian Club, you can visit us at canadianclub.org, and for news of the Empire Club at empireclub.org. Ladies and gentlemen, lunch will now be served. Thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful day and a great weekend. Thank you.